holy change is a very daunting presentation to give. In any sort of change process, as I think should be obvious to everyone, there are no silver bullets, and especially in community leadership, there really aren't that many clear 1, 2, 3 easy steps for doing so. That said, we do have some we do have we do have some ideas and guidance which we hope we will be able to discuss with you and hear feedback on as well. So this is a presentation in 5 parts, and it begins with a reflection on, with a self-reflection on where is this change coming from, authority or collaborative community leadership. We then go through 3 basic ideas that are fundamental to leading any sort of change process. And you'll see how they kind of build on one another. And then finally, we'll end with a discussion about potential next steps for your congregation. We've asked folks in the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen to share the different kinds of changes that they're in the midst of leading. You can see that there's clergy transitions, there's a greater focus on God, there are merging parishes. So again, this is going to be very contextual, and some of this will apply to your situation, and some of it may not. Please let us know and share with us what works and what doesn't for you. So the first question I have is, it has to do with where is this change coming from? And I think one of the key points here is that there are, in leading change, there's oftentimes the temptation to lead based on one's authority or one's canonical responsibilities. But we note that there's a difference between authority and community leadership. So change based on authority oftentimes is much faster. So there are a lot of benefits to making changes based on solely on authority. It's faster with unilateral decisions being fastest of all. It's oftentimes a very clear process. It emphasizes, it really leans on roles and canonical responsibilities. But community leadership is a bit different. It really requires us to go beyond simply leaning on our canonical authority, as, say, a rector or the vestry has certain canonical rights to make decisions, to a much more engaged and oftentimes messier process. So what does it mean to lead a holy change? Leading change in a community of faith requires ongoing prayerful discernment of a shared vision. It's slower, with emphasis placed on building consensus around need, around where you're going. Oftentimes, it's a much less clear process. There are a lot of moments in which you're taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later. So it's slow, it's trudging, there are setbacks. What else? What else would you put on this list as a description of leading holy change? You'll see on the side of the screen there's this little chart. I'm not sure that it's large enough to be seen very well, but it's different kinds of decision making, with the top being unilateral decision making being the fastest, certainly, and involving only one person, and at the bottom consensus and unanimity, noting that that's a much slower process and it involves everyone. One of our key arguments today is that we need to be moving toward making decisions around change processes and leading change that involves more folks within the community in the process itself. So as I said, it's a very complex and challenging topic, and certainly not one in which there are simple answers. That said, we draw we draw on a variety of sources um, uh, to uh, to come up with a few recommendations about how to get unstuck in leading change. And the first is just in no particular order, Interaction Institute's facilitative leadership workshops and trainings. If you're not familiar with their workshops and trainings, they're a great resource. The book Leading Change by John Carter, which is considered kind of a classic seminal text on leading change. And then the wonderful work that's happening in the Diocese of Massachusetts. Brendan and I have attended several trainings called the Leadership Development Initiative. Um, so those are some of our sources. So there are three basics about leading change, and you'll note that this is a pyramid rather than steps because you need to have a solid foundation first before you move to the others. And I mentioned, going a few steps forward and then steps back. Oftentimes you need to rebuild the foundation to get it any further along the process. And the first is a sense of urgency around the need for change. Two people in the text, in the chat box, noted clergy transition. And that seems to be a pretty clear case that you can make to the congregation around the need for change. Maybe you don't have to focus as much in that case on establishing a need for change. But Cindy, I believe, mentioned that the old formation models aren't working anymore and that we need to change. I would imagine that that's a hard case to make in many, many different places, that people are surprisingly tied to older models of formation, and that there is going to need to be some energy spent at the very beginning really making the case that things do need to shift. Another person mentioned um, wanting the congregation to become more focused on God. That's a culture shift. I can tell you in working with various vestries, oftentimes vestries are very, very, they listen to reports on the finances and property and do not even include, say, a prayer or time of discernment around vision and mission. What we've heard is that it takes about 5 years sometimes to shift a vestry from a focus exclusively on issues of finance and property to one that is really actively discussing Jesus and God and where is God calling the congregation. So again, in those cases, you have to make a much more concerted case for why there's a need for change. So we'll talk about each of these point by point. Generating urgency around the need for change. Again, that first layer. This comes from the work of John Carter, and his point is that one of the biggest, or the biggest mistake that folks make when leading change is to assume that the need for change is obvious to everyone. A large part of the front end of this work is about convincing others that there is, in fact, a need for change. So what are some sources I would ask again, for you to respond in the chat box? What are some sources of inertia in your congregation that are resisting change? Generally speaking, unless the roof is falling down or it's going to the point of a clergy transition, unless the person has literally left yesterday, people are going to be a little bit resistant to change without the visible crisis. In many cases, we have congregations with rich, successful, and storied pasts, and people lean on that past as a way of not moving into the future. Too many visible symbols that all is fine. I'll share a little story about that in just a moment. A lack of honest feedback around performance of staff or volunteers in working with congregations. We know of, parish administrators who may not be able to use a computer, and yet they're kept on staff for a wide variety of reasons. So having some sort of standards, developing some standards or honest feedback around performance of staff and volunteers is necessary. And too many messages from leaders indicating that everything is okay. I think we all know, have all experienced also that temptation. So yeah, I'm seeing Anna's point. I always thought it was my job to make everything be okay, or at least make people think it was. Yes. Um, it's very hard, especially I think in leadership team meetings, vestry meetings included, to move from a place in which you're reporting successes to also sharing failures in an honest way. Not just failures, but the challenges in an honest way, and saying, I don't really have a solution. Can we come up with one together? So how do we move from uh, if John Cotter's point is correct, his argument is that any congregation or organization, but a congregation is going to be pretty much okay with not changing and will be resistant to change. And so it's going to take some leadership, and it's going to take, quite honestly, some risk-taking in order to generate a sense of urgency around the need to change, with the very top one being, stop saying that everything is okay. Become much more honest about problems. Talk about the missed opportunities that result from not changing. Um, Allow a crisis to loom large or stop hiding the one already taking place. Now, this is not ECF saying that you should let a crisis happen. That is not a good idea. But really, again, it really goes back to the first point. If it's very clear that the building needs significant repair, um, you know, allowing the prospect of the roof caving in or to generate some urgency in appropriate ways is okay. I mean, it's risky for a leader to do that. You have to do it well and thoughtfully and deliberately, but it's really about facing the truth as well. Setting performance standards for your leadership team, staff, and volunteers, that certainly wakes people up. Evaluating whether symbols are conveying everything is fine. And I want to share with you, last week I went to a wonderful annual dinner of a church organization here in New York. And it's a wonderful, wonderful event held at a very lovely club. The dinner is beautiful. We had a wonderful speaker. Um, from all from from that evening alone, you would imagine that this is a beautiful and a thriving organization. But in fact, it is not. It is not. It is in dire straits, and really, really needs to have much more honest conversations about its future. But it has enough to where the main communication that it is sending to members as well as people like me who are more on the periphery is that everything is fine. And that is something which, if you want to generate some urgency, needs to be considered. And then, of course, oftentimes outside folks can say things that others aren't able to, and certainly ECF is frequently brought in that role and capacity as well. So again, I want to just reinforce some of this with a story. And this, it's hard to tell these stories without removing all the while having to remove all the names and just to protect the innocent. But this is a true story. I heard it just a while ago. Again, another church organization with significant membership issues. I spoke with a board member who made it her personal commitment over time to go to every single board meeting and talk about the lack of youth and young adults who were joining the church organization. And this was a very, very hard thing for her to do because this was the elephant in the room. No one wanted to talk about it. She described the feeling as if she was going to be kicked off several times. And over time, what she realized was that that was her ministry. That was her ministry of leadership to the wider organization, was simply raising a sense of urgency around the elephant in the room that no one was talking about, going and repeatedly saying, this is an issue that we need to be looking at. After I think she did that for 3 years, finally this organization has made some significant moves. Is starting to make some moves to address this issue, but it really took someone deciding that this was going to be her ministry. And there are several aspects of this story that I really like. One is that this person put herself, well, she was a leader. And a part of being a leader is taking on the risk of, yes, being kicked off or being challenged and being the person who makes others uncomfortable. That's part of what it means to be a leader. The second is that she was persistent. So again, um, if if John Cotter's right in saying that we should never underestimate the amount of inertia in the congregation or in our systems, it's going to take someone really deciding that this is going to be their thing, that this is going to be, they're going to be patient and they're going to be persistent and they're going to bring this up over time to generate some recognition that, yes, we need to change. So. Questions or comments? Again, this is such a challenging and complex topic that everyone is going to be in different situations, and some of this will apply and some of this won't. So let us know what's working for you, what's not. I'm just going to pause and see.
Well, looks like we have a couple people typing stuff in the meantime, but just want to emphasize that is this, if you don't even, have these questions, is this register with your particular situation? How does this seem to fit in with where you are in your current situation and in your congregation? Would love to hear about that as well. So Lori writes, asks, do you think it wise to have conversations with leadership about urgency before bringing it forward to the congregation?
So that, yeah, this is about sequencing, right? Sequencing, especially of some of these harder conversations. Um, it's hard to make a generalization, but I would say yes, especially just in just a moment, we're going to talk about different stakeholder categories within the congregation. And one of the stakeholder categories is those who are ultimately responsible for the decision to go forward with a change. Um, this includes those who have canonical responsibility. So let's say it's a change in worship. Well, uh, rectors are canonically responsible for worship within a congregation, and you have to be engaging, even if you're not the rector, and you need to be engaging that person, yes, from the very beginning. Um,
Are say an examples like that I had in the congregation that I worked for. Of course, during the recession, we had to significantly tighten our belts, and there were a lot of cuts that were made to our budget. It wasn't until well into, I would say, year and 6 months, it may have been past even a full budget cycle by that point, one of my colleagues brought up when we were meeting as a staff concern over that had done too good of a job of basically saying that everything was okay, that we had shielded the congregation from the true budget reality that we were facing, and that everyone was thinking that everything was pretty hunky-dory still, and that, even though we had had to make some really significant changes to a lot of what we did, and including, with the staff, but that out of our concern about wanting to make sure that we didn't want anybody thinking we're in crisis, because we weren't in crisis. We were going to make it through just fine. But it was a very important step, especially to the future financial health of the congregation, to everyone to realize that, yeah, we had to really step things back. We had done a great job of being able to weather through some of those storms, but that going forward, we really needed, as a staff as well, to recognize that we were enabling a bit of a problem, and that was a really important step to take, and in some ways that's a sort of a example of really needing to engage folks, your stakeholders, the leadership first before it was going to the congregation, because he had done that to the congregation first. That would have surprised me. That would have surprised all my colleagues.
I think so Cindy makes a great point. Sometimes crises can be the best things to happen. You are liberated from propping up old ways of doing things and are able to innovate. So it depends on the crises, right? There are different ranges of crises. Major crises, one of the things about major crises is that suddenly all your resources, time, energy, money, need to be devoted to addressing that issue alone. And so the shift from having kind of a thoughtful long-term process, or also the more practical, wanting to do anything else for that year becomes impossible if it's a major crisis, like literally there's something from the roof falling down, and you need to actually then fix that. So that's why we don't advocate letting crises happen, but rather, speaking clearly that this may happen as well. So that's just something to bear in mind as well. Okay, thank you for your comments, and we'll just please continue to reflect and see and integrate this ideally into your own context. So let's say that you've taken those steps, and the need for change is indeed widely recognized. Again, a temptation within any organization is to go from there toward having the vision for how you're going to get out of the situation, and not really involving many people in the process for coming up with that vision. So a second recommendation is to really spend some time, in fact, building a team of people, whether it's formal or informal, who will help to see this major change process through. And there are some just general recommendations for who you want to involve in this second step of building a team. And when thinking about groups, we recommended, or I mentioned earlier, thinking about your stakeholders. So in any sort of change process, there are going to be folks who have a stake in the outcome of the change. And I find these categories to be very, very helpful. Those ultimately responsible for decisions, those who implement or can prevent implementation of whatever the decision is that is made, those who will be directly affected by the outcome, those who have information and expertise that you don't have and that you want to bring into the room. Um, Betsy Jeffrey mentioned in her comment that yeah, the need to include people with people of leadership from and have a responsibility to be informed right from the beginning. Um, Absolutely, that's the category. Those ultimately responsible for the decisions, those who have the canonical responsibility to be aware of what's happening within the congregation. So here are just also two examples. Again, they're hypothetical examples. Um, uh, that hopefully illustrate the different categories. And I want you to know that you know we use this. This is not just a theoretical tool. Here at ECF, we use this as a tool when talking about leading a change process that will affect many different parts of the church. And we sit down and we write out who fits into these categories. Who do we need to be mindful of? Who do we need to be reaching out to? Um, and again, the question of sequencing comes to mind. Who do we need to be reaching out to first? And a shift depending on uh, your particular situation. Um, there are other categories. There are other groups you in this chart. Again, this entire presentation, it is available. And then we'll also be sending it out a little bit. Um, okay. And I want to tell a story again about the third category. Those who implement or prevent implementation this decision. Because that's oftentimes a little bit less clear than the will implement or prevent implementation of the story. So again, a true story, removing as many possible. Um, so there's a congregation that was in the midst of trying to make a the church no longer really reflected the neighborhood. So they wanted to become more hospitable. And one of the ways they saw basement, which was multiple floors down, really inaccessible, to the back of the people who were popping in or who were visiting would essentially need to kind of walk through coffee hour uh, visitors as well as longtime members. A great idea. Um, but who was in, so that I believe is the third category. Those who uh, those and relied on outside expertise for this great idea. Uh, really very it very quickly became about um, you know, church for the past 30 years. And it of the sanctuary. Uh, really created a significant rift because in many ways, uh, a significant change. So I want to talk for your group of people who will help to lead this. We model whenever we're starting, when we're looking we want to have um, that working in groups. Um, there's there's a line from if you want something done, ask a busy person. Uh, very much models that we hear within the church, which is if you're looking, if you're a busy person, it's true to say yes immediately. That person down the road to say yes to your project um, including uh, the and he sat with the coffee hour volunteers. This is where we all share this that need to happen if we were to in fact become church. So, for instance, um, when someone from says that they want to bring their and he went through this process of imagining what that they would have to do with the coffee hour folks, with help with hospitality. He did that with help them imagine, when someone takes your seat on Sunday, be. Um, for, this is again just from after that uh, general principles. Um, Visions need to be shared in a variety of ways. They need to be multiple platforms and different mechanisms is really helpful. So we are very near 8 o'clock, and I'm kind of rushing now. Three and I would like to spend the last 5 minutes again just looking at comments and questions and what's working for you, what's not, uh, what do you see in, in your case?
So we had some interesting comments on the chat off to the side. I just want to highlight for anybody who wasn't following the chat and to Miguel as well that Anna made a really wonderful comment that in the spirit of not saying everything is okay when it's not, she wondered that if using, I guess, our terminology, ways forward is more helpful than solutions. That many of the church's problems these days are insoluble, and ways forward will look more like something entirely new than like a solution to the identified problem.
Yes, absolutely. I'll share an example. This can be applied. An example that we use at ECF. We are very invested in changing the model of leadership within the church from top-down, clergy-centric model toward one that is focused on collaborative team leadership. And what we use as our reflection for our weekly meetings is 1 Corinthians 12, which is about, the body has many parts. And this vision, I would call it a text vision. It's a complex text as well. It includes challenging lines. It's not clear cut, but we use that text to ground ourselves each week in a conversation about that presents a vision, a hopeful vision of where we're going. It doesn't tell us how to get there, but it doesn't present it in a clear-cut solution, but it really moves us, I think, in a way toward a shared and biblical vision of leadership that we're striving to promote.
And yeah, definitely wanted to note that, about what happened to prayer and to God, and I think that we absolutely always want to keep Jesus at the center of all of this. That I think I'm speaking a bit for Miguel on this, but that it's hard to compact all of the information to these hour-long presentations, but that definitely keeping the center of all of these conversations is extremely. These need to be spiritually grounded conversations that we're engaging, especially some of these difficult conversations.
So again, yeah, how can we get the clergy on board with collaborative leadership? Still seeing a lot of top-down models of leadership. Great question. I the fundamentals of this presentation. We are very patiently and persistent as many possible in as many venues as possible, and saying that we need to change. And we said, knowing that there's a lot of inertia around you in particular. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for let me change this. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. Again, this is a very daunting topic to present on, quite honestly. You're going to be getting a survey in just a few minutes. And I'd encourage you to really think about how we can improve this presentation for the future. And I hope this is helpful. You'll be getting a recording as well as slides. And Brendan will share also contact information. I'll put my email in the chat box, so if you'd like to be in touch.
Yes, and everyone, please do be in touch. And if you have other questions, know we have to kind of wrap up things pretty quickly since we start a